Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. I am not doing well, which I guess is more to say that my PC is not doing well. As best as I can figure, and it's been incredibly frustrating to try and figure this out. The G-Skill Ripjaw RAM that I got is just not designed well. It says it can do XMP, but it really can't after a couple years, and it just burns out. If that's not the case, then it's either my power supply, my motherboard, or my CPU, or even possibly the fact that one of the CPU fans seems to have been plugged in wrong. All of which I found out in trying to diagnose and fix this. The problem with this is, like, generally speaking, they say if you plug in a power supply to like a tester, or put a pin in a couple of pins and then plug it in and the fan comes on, at that point they say it works. Like they're washing their hands of it possibly being the power supply. And in all fairness, I did plug in the tester. For the most part, the tester's voltages are right on spot. They're definitely within spec for the ATX connector, which is really the only one I needed to test. Then the motherboard says if you turn on the computer after it's been plugged in and it makes it past the post part, then they say, well, that's not the motherboard then. Which, for the most part, is true also, but not always true. If there's a really, really weird scenario where the power supply potentially just shoots up the power randomly, or the motherboard shoots up the power randomly, that could happen. Same is true for the CPU. There's really no test at all for a CPU. It's just like if your computer works at all, and that's that. So yeah, the only thing that I know for certain is happening, and it's happened twice now, about a month apart, is that the RAM, the 4 G-Skill Ripjaw RAM sticks I had, 2 of them just straight up short-circuited and would not work. At least one of the pair would not work at all. The other would run incredibly unstable. And I'd already sent off and gotten replacements for 2 of them, and now I'm trying to send off and get replacements for the other. But ideally, I'd like to just get a refund on all 4 of them and buy Corsair RAM instead. But to do that, I'd pretty much have to eat like $300, $250 to $300 of investment for 64 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. That's a lot of money to lose, particularly when I have Mario Day tomorrow and need to get at least one game for this Nintendo Switch I just bought. The timing is just absolutely awful. I did even swap out the Corsair power supply I had with the other Corsair power supply I had, which is about the only time you even have a chance of not blowing up your motherboard when you're using module cables between 2 different power supplies, as if it is the exact same company. Suffice it to say, it's really frustrating, and at a certain level there is almost an argument to trying selling all the suspect components, or throw away all the suspect components and build a whole new PC. Just new power supply, new motherboard, new CPU, new GPU. Like, anything is suspect. And this is the kind of short-circuiting stuff that happened back in the day when I first learned to build computers. We don't need to sit on the main screen here. that is just not something that I was hoping would ever come back as a thing or even be a possibility. So we have a maintenance notice here planned for March 10th to the 11th. I suppose what this means when it says rooms and match history will be removed is either the cache server part of that is removed or temporarily it's just removed. There's no indication as far as what the maintenance is going to involve, if any new content is going to appear around that or not. So suffice it to say, I'm not happy. Now I do have my old computer, which it would be a nightmare and a lot of time to set that up and try and use that. And my old computer was the one that was supposed to have been the new server, and I didn't get very far with that. But yeah, things suck right now. Right now, with the RAM and the XMP not enabled, which at some point my BIOS was completely reset in a bad adjustment of disabling XMP and lowering the voltages, or raising the voltages, or I don't even know. I was just trying to get everything back to default. The BIOS reset, and so everything is back to default, which is fine, with the slight exception that I just have all the fans spinning at full speed, which honestly I think I want that. I think I do want it just to constantly spin at full speed. It's not so noisy, I think, that it would be a real problem. But yeah, this is gonna be. It's so slow with the RAM as it is that I think I am going to potentially just try and buy new RAM. And I don't know what I could do with the other RAM. Honestly, I think maybe I could try and sell it on eBay or something, but I don't know if I want to even bother with that nonsense. Okay, we need to do... Sorry, I'm just sitting here. And suffice it to say, I'm pretty irritated. But at any point, this video in this stream could just crash and end. Let me warn of that. It crashed right as I was wrapping up playing Lego Worlds, or an episode of Lego Worlds. For the accountability section, I did play all the way through Donut County and did a pretty terrible job. In fact, before that even tried to cover Spotlight Chips Challenge 1 and Chips Challenge 2, and I did a pretty terrible job of just capturing the window of Chips Challenge 1. So, yeah. The problem with Donut County is I was making like 30-minute episodes. I made like 2 30-minute episodes, and then I made a 2-hour episode. So it's just like really inconsistent. And ideally, I do want to make like 30-minute episodes, but I might as well have just made 2 2-hour episodes or 3 1-hour episodes. Perhaps I should just find a middle ground of an hour to 45-minute episodes always, even if I think the game is going to be fairly short. I think Donut County comes off as very much a first pass of an indie game that was funded by an indie fund, so I don't know if you really would even call it that indie. Let's see, let's do on solo mode, although playing in ranked would accomplish more. Yeah, let's just do ranked. But yeah, there are just kind of like beginnings of ideas that get implemented in a single level, and then they come back at the end, and that's it. There's a really long back half of the game where it feels like you're going to have as many levels as there are people sitting around the campfire telling their flashback stories, which it has an interesting story mechanic in which you kind of have a flash forward and then a bunch of flashbacks for each level, and the story is kind of silly, but it's okay, but it also doesn't particularly connect to the game itself. If this was a kind of cheaper cell phone game, it wouldn't have any story or very little story in it, and you would just be doing the puzzles. The game literally has you just control with the left stick and sometimes press the A button, which is very simplistic controls as far as gameplay mechanics go, and at times it kind of even glitches and shows like a mouse cursor as it transitions from dialogue to the gameplay control, and the mouse cursor is just a simplistic white dot when you could have just left it as a mouse cursor if you were going to do that. And the game starts off very much like it was made completely by Ben Esposito, when really, like all indie games and games that people claim to have made completely by themselves, or most games that people claim to have made completely by themselves, there's a lot of other people that worked on Donut County in other aspects and contributed. Plus there's a lot of what I would hope were pre-bought 3D models, because they're all low polygon 3D models. It is basically the opposite of Katamari Damacy. Instead of rolling a ball and collecting random junk and making the ball bigger, you're rolling a hole to suck in junk to make the hole bigger. But in comparison to Katamari Damacy, Donut County fails miserably. The levels aren't as big, they aren't as fun. The story is not as wacky. The music isn't that memorable. But it's alright. It was an alright game. Whereas Chip's Challenge 1 and 2, very, very old games. Like, originally made for the Atari Lynx, but more memorable as a Windows 3.1 game. And actually, you should have the original music and graphics enabled, because it sounds and looks way better in the original version compared to the Windows 3.1 versions. But the first game has like somewhere between 150 and 200 levels, and then with a level expansion pack, the second game, Chip's Challenge 2, has literally 400 plus levels, and you're only going to get through maybe 20 of them before you get bored. Chip's Challenge is all over the place as far as gameplay concepts. You'll get a level made by one person that's just a complete maze. You'll get another one that's an adventure run from the monsters. You'll get another that is a puzzle. They tend to get very big and very boring and overly convoluted with elements. And sure, back in the day of Atari Lynx, if you had an Atari Lynx, I didn't, or a Windows 3.1 computer, back in the day, you probably would have had maybe only 1 or 2 games, so you would play the heck out of something like Chips Challenge, or you'd be working a job that has a PC and you'd be playing the heck out of Chips Challenge. But in modern times, there's just no way to do that. And what's funny there is a Chuck's Challenge 3D and Chuck's Challenge that's not on Steam, that were 3D improvements or remakes of the kind of same idea, which is effectively a Sokoban box pushing game. But like, I didn't buy that game. And then inherently, my finances are seemingly going to be completely wiped out for the rest of this year. I'm thinking Amazon Prime Day, probably not going to buy too much. The fall sale for Steam games, probably going to buy very little. The winter sale or November sales of Steam's probably not going to buy too much there, which that's fine. I have plenty of games, so if I have to shift some money there that way, that's fine. But I still want to kind of keep that momentum of buying new games, but I'm not keeping that momentum of playing new games. If anything, there's an incredible danger here where I get this Nintendo Switch and I start spending so much time playing Nintendo games that that I don't manage to even maintain my current momentum as far as making pre-recorded footage. It would be really nice if I was a year ahead as far as pre-recorded game footage. And at some point I needed to buy a new phone. A new cell phone. Well, that was crazy. I don't even know what happened there. Let's see, can we save a replay of that, or is that disabled? Match history. Would this be the... Oh, you can report people. Ghost Trick Dueled. One of these Ghost Trick cards, it must be this one, I would suspect. Divine Arsenal. Nope. Okay. So there's 2 level 4 monsters for Ghost Trick Angel of Mischief. You can also XYZ summon this card using a Ghost Trick XYZ monster you control's material, except Ghost Trick Angel of Mischief. Transfer its materials to this card. When the number of materials on this card becomes 10, you win the game. Once per turn, you can detach one material, add a Ghost Trick spell trap from your deck. Once per turn. So he had to somehow step through several of these XYZ things to get these Ghost Trick cards. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which means also somewhere here there are cards that can be special summoned and used as attachments. So like this would be 2 level 1 monsters, so you'd have these 2 on the field and then be able to summon that, and then maybe get another one on the field. This is 2 XYZ of the same rank, 2 plus XYZ monsters, 2 plus XYZ monsters, 2 plus level 1 monsters. That is quite the combination. But if anything, it kind of shows like the 7 or 8 card combination you can make in Yu-Gi-Oh! Whereas you really wouldn't be able to do that in anything else. Okay, let's cover the video game news now. Yeah, there's going to be more that I'll have to say for LEGO Worlds, but at the core of it, LEGO Worlds is a very weird product, and I'll leave it at that. LibRetro says the Philips CDI emulation just became a lot easier with RetroArch and the same CDI core. The Philips CDI is a console that was advertised during the middle of the night very heavily, and an incredibly expensive console when it came out, like for $1,000 or more, and an incredibly garbage console also. But yeah, the games on it are few and none of them are really good. They play terribly. It played with this gamepad interacting with a CD. I almost feel like there was one that interacted with a Laserdisc, but no, I'm thinking of something different there. But it is memorable as one of the like major failures, I would say, of consoles, of which there was a lot of failures of consoles, but it's one that I certainly remember. And I really wanted a CDI. I definitely got sold on the flashy advertising when it was happening. I also probably was suffering from a pretty major bout of insomnia because I was staying up and watching these pay-per-view commercials at the time, which I have several memories of being up in the middle of the night as a kid. That's part of my insomnia, just never being really fixed. But yeah, I'm really glad I didn't get it. In fact, there's a few things, and I imagine this is probably true for most people. There are a few things that I know I probably got, and in retrospect wish I had spent my money or my parents' money better. And certainly as a young kid, that's going to be the case, is that you're going to just want everything and anything. But there was a few little things I got. Mostly I think I probably did that way less than the average number of the average kid, though, because I was so obsessed about collecting Nintendo for my Nintendo collection. Anything I've gotten Nintendo worked out pretty well. Because I did manage to collect a lot of collectibles, although they are all sitting in a garage now, and there's a distinct possibility that if I were to go and actually start looking at those collectibles, they may have broken apart and fallen apart. But I'll leave that for museum restorers to deal with when I finally do get around to donating it to a museum. And yes, I am totally tired and done with the Nintendo collection and never want to touch it. In fact, I'm a little surprised I'm even bothering to play Nintendo games with the Switch, which I'm not particularly considering the Switch as something that I would consider part of the Nintendo collection. There's too many people collecting Nintendo now to to really worry about a general console. I'd have to get something that was pretty exclusive and rare before I would think about adding it to the Nintendo collection. So, yeah. Libretto also says there's new cores for the A52 WASM4 Arduous, same CDI, and Jump Bump. So several new cores for RetroArch have been added as part or following up on this 1.10.1 release. Which inherently you don't need to consistently have new cores. You just need to need to have active cores that are getting updates. Like, nobody really cares if you have 20 different cores to emulate the NES. You just need one that does it well and one that does it accurately. And ideally those would be the same thing, but there are old versions of cores and just sped up versions of cores for low power devices like the Raspberry Pi that still need to be supported because there's a big enough community for that. And then there's people on PC who would want potentially 100% accurate emulation and can get that for a NES game. Yeah. NES is pretty much a solved problem, so getting it, if there was a new core specifically for NES games, they would have to do something fairly interesting or different. Moving on, I'm still talking about G4, but really I'm just complaining about it. They launched on the on-demand Pluto TV, and then they just went on a ridiculous like meme tweet spree on Twitter, which is gonna get them muted. It's just like in a 2-hour span, as they were relaunching again, there's just tweet after tweet after tweet after tweet. They also put out something as far as Women of G4, which is fine for International Women's Day. I'm not going to complain about that. But it is a distinct difference in just how much they were tweeting before, to the point where it just feels like they put somebody new in charge of the Twitter feed that didn't know what they were doing, or they have just gotten completely desperate. If they were tweeting news specifically, I might consider following them and not muting them, but they're tweeting their own advertisement for their own stuff instead of important information. It is also interesting that they seem to have also shifted to a more podcast style, where they are sitting around in a dark room talking into microphones, a video podcast, instead of their sets that were like bright and like colorful and well lit, and people were sitting on a couch. I guess you might call that Talking Dead style. Which, yeah, at a certain level, the whole thing should have been always a podcast. Here's like one of their main sets. They had 2 or 3 of them where people are sitting on the couches and there's just a lot of bright walls in the background. And here we can see a silly skit. But yeah, it seems like the relaunch is being treated very much like it was just a beta relaunch for yet another relaunch. I did see somebody post on a Facebook group talking about the G4 Pluto TV relaunch, and yeah, there was a lot of comments, certainly, of people just going, it's not for me. It was a product of its time, basically, and that they tried to watch it, they tried to like it, and they just couldn't get into it. And then there was a lot of people claiming that people were being salty against the female presenter and her kind of anti-male kind of video game rant, or anti-women and being displayed as pretty rant, or whatever it really was. Like, I don't even remember the drama. I'm over it, but what's funny is I didn't actually see anybody actually post that, but I was just skimming the articles. So who knows? There might be a few people upset about it still. But certainly them launching with a level of controversy is not going to help them, and I just don't know if there really is anything that could help a TV show, particularly an on-demand TV show, work. TV is obviously dying as they try to move everybody into individualized streaming services for all the new content, or any content that anybody would want to see. And the only way I could see G4 working as a TV show is if it was an actual TV channel with an actual channel lineup, which it seems like Pluto TV is somewhat like that. They seem to have shown the channel lineup, so maybe they have both on-demand and live broadcast content. But yeah, that live broadcast or pre-recorded broadcast scheduled content, appointment television is what they call it. Yeah, you really need that. You really need something catching kids and teenagers' attention as they come home from the school, and assuming kids even come home from school and turn on a TV to watch TV, which is a big assumption, almost certainly a wrong assumption. Man, these games are going long. But yeah, unless you can get people to new people to see your channel and get into it, and just hope that it catches people's attention versus watching PewDiePie play video games, I think that G4 is probably dead. PewDiePie really would have been the get, certainly. Either PewDiePie or maybe the safer Jacksepticeye, to hire one of them over and be a specific major presence, new face of G4 would have been very, very useful. But all they did get was Adam Sessler and Kevin Pereira, both of which have said that they're going to probably leave fairly quickly, and the completionist and the esports lady that made the controversy, and a wrestler. None of those were particularly that big of a draw. The completionist, in a lot of ways, he benefits from moving away from working on the completionist YouTube channel, because he was just starting to play games over and over again. Anyways. But yeah, you would want to get something like Game Grumps, or you know, even Good Mythical Morning. Really, like, grab those YouTube channels that are fairly safe and fairly successful and throw a bunch of money at them. Which clearly they didn't have the money for that. Yeah. But yeah, G4. G4 is gonna go down in the history books, I think, of the wrong way to try to launch a channel. It was probably wrong to think of it as coming back to TV in the first place, and that one obsessive conceit, I think, makes it fall apart. And there's been no talk of like showing reruns, and that's the one thing you would want to do. Is you could have just said, hey, G4 is back and we're going to make several YouTube channels and we're going to show reruns of the old X-Play and the reruns of the old Attack of the Show, and we're going to run ads on those and get as much ad revenue as possible. On occasion, once a week, we'll make a new X-Play. Once a week, we'll make a new Attack of the Show, so there will be new content also. But it really should have been somewhere around 92% nostalgia and reruns, getting the other shows that are still popular amongst smaller groups of fans like Code Monkeys and game trailers and things like that. In a lot of ways, Giant Bomb could have been, at any point since its creation, Giant Bomb could have been the new X-Play. And they didn't choose to do anything that was really like X-Play or G4 in general, except for maybe some of their more interesting end-of-the-year skits. And that's it. Maybe Whiskey Media in a whole, when it was first created, was somewhat like G4, but Whiskey Media mostly failed. Yeah. I just don't think it works. And if it was going to work, you might even want just people to submit their own videos on Attack of the Show. Just, you know what, why don't you make a video, why don't you do your own X-Play video game review? If you can, if we select it, we'll put it up. Just get a lot of community involvement and a lot of cheap free labor from it. Moving on, HBO Max has ordered a Batman spin-off starring the Penguin, starring Colin Farrell, which, okay. And I guess that's not really video game related. I don't know why I felt the need to mention that. Lucas Pope, the maker of Papers, Please, on desktop, has now included a Ukrainian localization thanks to a Twitter person, localizer. I'll get Ukrainian into Oberdin too, but it'll take a bit longer. There's almost certainly a lot more text in Oberdin, or the Return of Oberdin, than Papers, Please. What's kind of funny though is Papers, Please really is not the same experience as what's happening in Ukraine right now. It's not like there are open borders with Russia and Ukraine and that there is a border check person checking papers and passports. They're in open war. Let's see. Trying to find this tweet from the ESA. The ESA has been highlighting a lot of women in government. Here it is. Stacey Fuhr spoke with at Law 360 about her FTC career and guiding parents, kids, and companies on changing privacy landscape in her role as the senior vice president, I guess. But that is certainly above my head as far as what I'd want to read. And then they also are doing this like story mode. And at a certain point, I guess that makes a lot of sense because the Games for Change story mode and the ESA working together. Since the ESA is effectively a lobbyist group, that it would make sense to highlight women in government for International Women's Day or month or whatever. Here they even have a banner, although the banner is kind of convoluted in that you have Kerbal Space Program here, and then a picture of a building I couldn't really identify, and then what looks like an Age of Empires screenshot, and then this may be the, what is it? Life is Strange game, like Before the Storm. Yeah. But yeah, nothing too offensive so far. Again, G4 channel updates for March. You can see the website is a mess of stuff, and they've really just changed their entire they've changed their entire website and relaunched again. So the YouTube channels and live streams are all changing, apparently. So the current G4 channel will become the brand new X-Play channel, and so they are moving all the other videos on demand elements to a new channel. So that's the way it should have been too, is people that want to see X-Play should just be able to see X-Play and not all of G4. They're going to have more esports partnerships and tournaments. Live stream will be on their own live channels. X-Play live show will premiere on X-Play's live channel. Attack of the Show live will premiere on the Attack of the Show live channel, and so on. More focus on the Discord. And these are all very basic things I have to point out that seems like they're like day one ideas and concepts that should have been thought through and committed to before anything else happened. And yet it's months after their original launch that they're talking about them. I'm moving far too slow through the news today, particularly with a computer that could break. Although I did run stability tests and it seems like it's mostly rock solid. Like I couldn't get it to crash. Actually, I'm using this new software called OCCT that can just like stress test specifically everything with the power to just see if the power supply might be bad, or just the CPU or just the GPU. And when things before the BIOS settings reset, when I would do the power supply test, less than 2 minutes it would reset the computer randomly. And that is something I think I need to mention or point out, is that when this RAM shorts out, it literally is flickering the lights in my house. It's not triggering a power supply. It's like flickering the lights in my house and then turning off the computer, or just resetting the computer. Not going through a Windows reboot or anything like that. It's just like instant turning it off. Something that you would think couldn't even happen, like an emergency would dumping everything turn off. I also need to find out if I have a speaker in my case and that I just didn't plug in the speaker, because I feel like at some point it should be beeping at me, and it's not beeping at me. And I almost certainly stupidly chose not to plug in the speaker, and I should have just had the speaker plugged in. Anyways, ScumVM has been once again accepted to the Google Summer of Code. They get accepted pretty much every year. Not that the Google Summer of Code is that much of anything, but it is something that they do, is pretty much a tradition. Susan Wojcicki tweeted out, I believe, that Google is increasing their investment in Poland, which I guess is good for them. That being said, I guess it is also worth mentioning that according to Reddit, I just saw the Russian government is going to try to nationalize any company's assets that tries to leave Russia, basically steal, which is what nationalization is, and turn it into turn back directly into communism. Like, I don't think we have to make the argument that Russia might be moving towards socialism here. I think it is definitely communism. Or somebody would have to explain the distinct differences. But so it's not particularly a great idea to invest in foreign countries. If your headquarters is in the United States, you probably shouldn't have too much investment or offices in other countries, particularly countries that could wildly do things like that. But on the other hand, I think there is probably a lot of nationalization that could happen to a lot of companies that would maybe do better for society and the economy and the environment anyways. For instance, gas isn't particularly expensive now. If all gas companies from top to bottom were nationalized, there could be a lot better control around that, instead of having hundreds of, well, no, it's probably millions of different gas stations around the world run by individual people and owned by individual people that are then having to potentially be owned by a franchise most of the time that then negotiates with some local oil shipper distributor, and then they negotiate with a local oil facility, and there's just probably 5 or 6 different levels of different people all negotiating, taking their 10% cut, where if gas was just like run by a company, something like the post office, where like there are no government contractors or very few government contractors, and it's all streamlined, we could probably have gas a lot cheaper and more consistently. I would say the factory farming issue, which people always get upset about, also is a great issue that can be nationalized. If the 3 major chicken manufacturers were all nationalized and run by the government, then there'd be less nonsense there. If Tractor Supply Company, you could practically name any bad company you've ever heard drama around and say, well, if the government was in charge of that, it might be a little bit better, it might be a little bit worse, but at least it's very familiar to complain about the government. Of course, I wouldn't be surprised if Russia really does nationalize the assets of these people, and then immediately the oligarchs steal that money and launder it. But yeah, the best any individual business could have done, and I guess they were smart certainly to have done this, was to pull out and stop doing business in Russia as early as possible, I think a lot of people did do that. Here we have a game on Steam called Pi.exe that's on the fall list. And I guess that was a fall list cleanup one we have left. I should mention that the fall list would not load today, so I don't have any fall list cleanups for today, which is fine. I think we had already talked about this Video Games Chronicle article of G5 for new generation consoles being 50% off at release. I think we probably had already talked about this one too. Refresh scoreboard and voice chat in April update for Battlefield 2042. New Dead Space live stream coming Friday. There is something about the anchoring, I think, specifically for Video Games Chronicles, where every stream it may just have a few more articles than we really need to talk about. Blizzard will reveal a new World of Warcraft expansion in April. A Hearthstone expansion and Warcraft mobile game details are also coming soon. Remember, Activision Blizzard in the process of being acquired by Microsoft, but they have to continue doing business and justifying their value. See, if I understand it right, there probably at some point needs to be a shareholders meeting where the shareholders of Activision Blizzard get together and vote to approve the acquisition. And they may have already done that and authorized Bobby Kotick to do that. I think already have. But then Microsoft may need to have a shareholders meeting and approve the acquisition too. That may have also happened already. So there is possibly some reasons why it might not go through, on top of just the government not approving it. Meanwhile, Bobby Kotick has been under fire for a while, so he is leaving the Coca-Cola's board of directors, and Coca-Cola is a pretty nasty company too, not because I know of any major Me Too style let's cancel Coca-Cola, but more importantly, Coca-Cola has been single-handedly a major factor in early onset diabetes, childhood diabetes, just massive amount of sugar consumption, selling a product that is literally not needed, addicting people through caffeine to that product, and then reaping the rewards of people drinking Coca-Cola and their spin-off products. Yeah, I don't really have a good thing to say about Coca-Cola ever. It's definitely a product that, if you erased it from history, the world would have been better off not having it. It is also worth mentioning that most colas and sodas, and Coca-Cola I don't think is any different, were designed as mixers to make alcohol, a even more deadly product, easier to consume and more tasty. So like Jack and Coke, for instance. So they were never even really designed to just be drunk exclusively. There really, in my mind, there's no reason to look at Coca-Cola as any different than the cigarette companies, and they are sweet, sugary soda companies are definitely next down the line as far as cigarette companies and bad companies that probably shouldn't be allowed to exist. I would prefer kids smoking marijuana, just pure like marijuana every day than drink a Coke every day. Both are pretty bad, but I think the fact that marijuana isn't really that addictive, or isn't chemically addictive at all, is not the same as sugar. And I love sugar, personally, but you have to be particularly careful about your consumption, and for decades it's worth mentioning that sugar companies have blamed fat in the oils for the obesity problem in the United States and diabetes and things like that, when it was scientifically even obvious at the time that it was sugar that was the problem, the massive amount of sugar that's taken in through drinking things like Coca-Cola. Moving on, a God of War TV series from the expansion creators is reportedly in the works. A lot of people like The Expanse, and I think The Expanse is pretty much over as a Netflix continued series. I think it originally was on the Sci-Fi Channel. I couldn't really get into it. I think maybe people like The Expanse more on I think people that enjoyed The Expanse probably like the books first. Amazon is said to be in negotiations with Sony to acquire the streaming rights. There is a question certainly here, is how much can you really do with even the new Dad of War character? I haven't played the new God of War, so I know a lot of people sung its praises and liked it and thought the story was better compared to the previous God of War games, where it was just, here's a sex minigame in one place and let's then kill brutally a million monsters and kill gods. Because there really isn't a narrative there. It would be a very high action movie you would make around God of War if you were going to make it based on the previous God of War games. And I still think you probably would want a high action movie instead of a TV series with the new games. Yeah. Even if every episode has 15-20 minutes of action, if it's going to be a 40-minute to an hour show, there's going to be a lot of sitting around, and the God of War character having to either talk to the boy, or the boy having to talk, and that's not really that character in my mind. So yeah, I think it's kind of a great example of people just scooping up whatever they can scoop up as a property and not really thinking things through. I should say, one of the things I was thinking about, but I can't really do it, was maybe going from 64 gigs of RAM down to 32 gigs of RAM. Can't do it though. Wow. Opening all these tabs really does take over 32 gigs of RAM up. And maybe Chrome could handle it, but I don't think that's the way to go. And actively just playing Yu-Gi-Oh! It doesn't feel particularly that slow. But I feel like once I start getting into even mediocrely complicated games like Local Worlds and start recording at the same time, I think I may have a noticeable slowdown without the XMP profiles. Like, I think RAM, DDR4 RAM, runs at somewhere like 2,200 megahertz without XMP, and it's just been around so long that XMP, whatever profile they set, brings it up to somewhere around 3,600 megahertz. So you're talking major increases on the thing that you want to be as fast and snappy as possible. It's computer RAM and video RAM that you would want as much of and as fast of as you can get. Like CPU for gaming probably is capped out. Like you really don't need more than 8 cores in most cases, because multi-core programming is still fairly limited. L2 cache, L3 cache, bigger, faster of that would be nice if you're looking into a CPU, but that's about it. Video cards are kind of difficult to get. There is a rumor that the 4090 might be in some metrics, and I imagine this is a planned leak that they put out this information. Nvidia probably leaked this information, but it's speculated that in some metrics the 4090 might be double the speed of the 3090, which there kind of has been that consistent level of improvement where some metric somewhere is about double compared to the previous generation of video cards. But also video cards have been really rare. Is this guy just going to be allowed to attack 4 times directly? I think he is, because he has 4 things attached to it. So that got me down to 4,000, which means if this... Oh, wow. This is a nonsense scenario here, with cards doing insanely large amounts of damage to me. You know what I am noticing though in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that they are starting to have more variety. And that gave me exactly 0 score. It feels like you should get at least 100 for playing. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says indie devs have created a huge 1,000-piece bundle to raise money for the Ukraine. This is an itch.io bundle though, so 1,000 really small itch.io games you probably would have never heard of and probably don't want to play. I do see something like Super Hot here. Skatebird, I think I've heard of this one. I think this is Crosscode. Figment I've heard of. But just even looking at this picture, there's a significant number of screenshots that don't seem recognizable. And I think there was an update to this where they have raised a lot of money for this effort, which it's not a bad way to potentially buy games. I wouldn't recommend buying games on itch.io, but if you're already into the infrastructure of itch.io, buying games and giving to a charity, if you believe in that charity and want to support it, it's not terrible. Again, you have to remember though that you're not getting the tax write-offs than they are as far as donating to a charity. But if it makes you feel good, which games are supposed to make you feel good, buying games, then you have to be careful certainly too about buying games that you're never going to play. That was what was increasingly becoming a problem with the Humble Bundle, on top of the Humble Bundle changing their pricing structure and not letting you donate all the money to charity if you wanted to. Which in fairness, that business model was always doomed to fail. Because I think most people were donating all the money to the charity and none to the developers or the Humble Bundle website owners. But yeah, Humble Bundle increasingly had the same games on sale over and over again, or they just had games I would never play. But at least Humble Bundle gave you Steam codes, where itch.io does not. Video Games Chronicle says it's been confirmed that the full GTA 5 package is $10 on PS5 and $20 on Xbox Series X. Rockstar's offering a limited time discounts on the new gen, with the PlayStation 5 getting $75 % off. What's crazy though is that seems like that is very cheap for these games, but I guess GTA 5 story mode or is not really worth that much to Rockstar, and they just want you to get into the GTA Online and get into the microtransactions. Effectively, they should have just gone the full route and gone free to play, because that's where this is going to be in 3 or 4 years, as the GTA 5 will just be a free to play game. GTA Online will just be a free to play game with microtransactions. And it's questionable whether Rockstar and GTA really had any legacy that they could ruin as games. Because while the GTA games were fairly popular, I don't know if they were ever fairly good. Particularly by modern standards, I don't know if they're particularly good. Moving on, FIFA 22 has now removed all Russian clubs and players from the football packs, FU2 packs. Let's see, items related to the Russian clubs no longer available to unlock. Which that is another one of these scenarios where do you own the game or not? Because you're literally just punishing people who are playing FIFA 22 around the world. Even people inside of Russia playing FIFA 22, which at a certain point Russia has been working for a couple years to set up a system where they could disconnect from the internet and create a splinter net. And Russia's been doing that voluntarily because they wanted to censor and stop their people from seeing other things. Yeah. I'm a little surprised we haven't heard any stories of people putting out like information or even misinformation via game chats. Because that would be one way you might be able to actually sneak out a message outside of Russia or into Russia, is through in-game chats. And that would be where I think game developers should probably focus more anyways, is have a real focus around helping the flow of information continue versus just getting rid of content and punishing everybody in what definitely can be construed as jingoistic, just anti-Russia hate. And yeah, we have to be careful. Certainly, these companies need to be a lot more careful about not just stoking a hate for the Russian people, and instead really getting their message out clearly as far as why they're doing the things and making sure what they're doing is the right thing, certainly. And I wouldn't be surprised if FIFA literally is making those Russian items not available to unlock or purchase simply because there was some license fee going to Russian companies and they can't transfer the money and honor the contracts. There definitely have been stories of people who are just straight up saying we're not going to honor the contracts anyways, and this is probably giving an out to a lot of shady business actions. So yeah, like we people who are against Russia will do best to help the Russian people realize that they're not hated and It's just the actions of the oligarchs and Putin, and even some of the oligarchs are speaking out against Putin. Yeah, there is definitely a scenario too where Putin gets ousted and some other oligarch or dictator comes in, and it's even worse. That is also a concern. Again, I'm going to try very hard to not end up talking politics or war too much for a video game news channel. Video Game Chronicles again says Capcom will reveal new details on Monster Hunter Rise's massive expansion next week. So that's an announcement for an announcement. PlayStation's State of Play returns on Wednesday with a special focus on Japanese game. Again, an announcement for an announcement. A new PlayStation 5 update improves system performance, and the voice command features still remain in beta. Boy, do I still absolutely hate the shapes and the angles around the PlayStation 5. Like, I really would prefer it just to be a box. But yeah. Good on them, I suppose, for improving system performance. Okay. If we do this, and we activate this, we'll see if we activate any traps. He's doing a Helios build. Okay. And then I think I can summon this now. Using that and that. Putting her on the field. I'm also, even though financially not really in the position, I'm also hoping that tomorrow, March 10th, Mario Day, has some better sales for Nintendo games, Switch games. Because, yeah, them being marked down from $60 to $40 is fine and all, but I kind of wish there would be some better sales. Also, I don't know if there really are even that many games. It seems to me like Splatoon 1 was actually on the Wii U and never even ported to the it was never even ported to the Switch. I don't know if that's actually accurate. Yeah. Moving on, GameStop apparently will be selling PS5 bundles online today and in stores on Friday. Players have discovered how to pause Elden Ring without modding the game. Apparently. There's been a lot of talk about wanting to pause or needing a mod to pause in Elden Ring. Darn it. Shouldn't have really done that. We'll just keep destroying his cards and see if his 2 cards he'll have to play this turn can do anything. You almost want to applaud the weird user interface decisions or lack of polish that Elden Ring has as an attempt to go alone and just start over from scratch instead of just copying the issues, copying games as they are. But it really hurts to pick up in playability when different buttons do things differently than what you would expect, and the whole system is just kind of oddly not polished. I talked about in the last stream how there was criticism of mainstream video game critics rating Elden Ring so high, and then it having like a lack of polish in the user experience and interface and several other things. And it turns out, and I didn't realize it at the time, that the people making that criticism were actually video game developers themselves of a different game that had just come out, and so they were basically being salty. But at a certain point, game developers would be the people who would know more than anybody else as far as where improvement needs to happen. And if anything, I think video game creators will come off as salty, but they should criticize each other's work instead of just praising everybody and making it a big circle jerk. I think there is a high chance, if Elden Ring continues to get tweaks and updates, that it'll be a very good game in a couple of years compared to now. That being said, it's not like they didn't have Dark Souls and Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 to already work on those aspects, and so them starting over, even compared to the previous games they've made, is not really reasonable. Like, every game shouldn't be completely different from every other game. A lot of concepts have been just established into the general meta of playing games, like guns have bullets, red barrels explode, things like that. A is to jump if your game jumps. We don't even really have a lot of consistency as far as whether X or B is to reload. But when you think about, like, when was the last time you even needed to change the controls on a game, it almost never happens these days because the controls are so consistent as far as how they work. And most of that comes from, like, Call of Duty becoming popular, certainly, and the Call of Duty control scheme. And certainly going back and playing Chip's Challenge, where you have to do WASD, boy is that awkward, certainly, to go back to playing WASD on a keyboard. Moving on, the original Dying Light has received a next-gen patch. It's available for PlayStation with an Xbox release following soon, which I'm wondering what the patch is really fixing, but apparently it's improving performance. Xbox Cloud Gaming is set to add mouse and keyboard support, according to Video Games Chronically. So currently it only supports controllers and touch controls, which that makes sense, but I wouldn't be surprised if there would be specific games in Xbox Cloud Gaming that don't particularly play well with controller support. Or with mouse and keyboard support. I imagine Flight Simulator works fairly well, but I would imagine there are definitely other games that wouldn't work. It's getting late. Lost Ark has topped 20 million players worldwide. The free-to-play MMO is currently the most popular game on Steam, which is interesting because I don't feel like anything new has happened with Lost Ark. Maybe they put out a new update, or like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why Lost Ark has a sudden boost in popularity. Yeah, I'm starting to yawn now too. Let's hurry up through the news. Apex Legends Mobile has a soft launch in 10 countries. Limited regional launch is underway following a delay. Yeah, and I'm waiting for the update for Destiny Child, my mobile game. I also signed up for Shift Up's new game that's going to be in beta for the US. I signed up for the beta for Project Nikki, which is basically Destiny Child in that it has lewd anime girls, but this time it's sci-fi with guns, and instead of demons and magical attacks, which may very well limit the amount of animations they can do in the long run. And I wouldn't be surprised if Project Nikki just gets a little dull too fast, or it doesn't allow me to automate it and I lose interest. I could also just not have enough bandwidth to play two games at the same time. And by bandwidth, I mean mental bandwidth. Just doing 2 dailies at the same time would be crazy, and I want to play Destiny Child all the way to the end. I wouldn't even be upset. I was thinking just the other day, if they finished the story and the narrative of Destiny Child and just put it kind of in a maintenance mode, where things just looped around in circles. Not that I want that to particularly happen anytime soon, and it would suck to never get any new characters at all, but if they are going to abandon it, it would be much nicer if they abandoned it in such a way that it just would repeat the same content and let you potentially max out your characters. The most recent event that just wrapped up on Destiny Child, I was in the top 12%, so as a free-to-play player, I am doing incredibly well. I don't think anybody really cares about Destiny Child other than me, though. I keep going second, but that's the only way this deck will even win. F-Zero X on Switch Online is Switch Online's next Nintendo 64 game. I don't even remember an F-Zero X. So I kind of need to go back and look at how this even works with the Switch Online expansion thing. I'm not really planning on getting the online service and getting the bad ROMs emulated through Switch Online, but if it's free and I get the online service because I want to play with other people, I could see maybe taking advantage of a few games, but probably not that many. Like that would be definitely going down the rabbit hole and spending a lot of time playing old games, which I would really just emulate those. Like I really have no moral objection to just emulating them. I really don't even have a moral objection to potentially hacking the Switch eventually and just running emulators to run that. One thing I'm thinking about is, and I really can't justify the expense, would be to buy a gaming laptop just as a backup. But I already have, I have 2 server computers. I could put a Windows install on that temporarily. I've got one that's not even being used as my old computer. Like, it's just not realistic to have a backup PC or a backup laptop. The real solution here is to fix my computer, which should have never had this problem in the first place. But it's annoying, to say the least. my last computer did not have anything break except for the power supply, which then led me to accidentally buy a CPU instead. I mean a GPU instead, which turned out, even though it was an extra expense I didn't need to spend, turned out really nicely because I got a GPU when GPUs were actually available to get. Apparently, something is stopping me from special summoning, ritual summoning, anything. Moving on, Atari has acquired the game database Moby Games for $1.5 million, which is really a small amount of money, relatively speaking. It's important to Atari that Moby Games retains every bit of its integrity, the company claims. What's funny though is Atari is not Atari, it's just somebody who bought the name Atari, and they really haven't done anything good with the name. I don't know Moby Games though as a company, so I don't even know what it does as far as a game database company. Let's see. And instead of reading the article, why don't I just click on Moby Games and see what it looks like. So it does seem like it is a game database Wikipedia type thing. So if we go to like an Apple II game here, let's give me a action Apple II game. There we go. Alf: The First Adventure on Apple II. And so it's kind of got its own Wikipedia, credits, screenshots, reviews, cover art, chroma art, releases, specs, an ad blurb on buy and trade. Apparently buy it on Amazon.com or eBay, or at least you can search for that. Seems like the tabs at the top just take you further downward. Yeah, I can't do anything here, I'm gonna lose. Let's just discard a card. There's no critical reviews for this game. There's no forum topics, there's no trivia for the game. So what you would really want here is the cover art, as far as your front cover, your back cover, and your media label, which this is not different labels than what you'd have in an ID3 tag of an MP3. And so if there was a scraper specifically built around Moby Games, which I don't know if there is, this might be nice if there was an advanced programmable interface to download these images. What they don't seem to have, at least for this game, is any video of gameplay, no trailers or anything like that. This is a particularly old game, certainly, but it doesn't seem to hint that there would be anything like that. And here you can kind of see what I think the main part of the game would look like. Again, CGA games looked a lot better on old monitors than they do LCD monitors. From what I hear, I think that's probably true. But yeah, if there was a way you could download those and make your emulation station look real pretty, or whatever launcher you're using to run ROMs, there's some value in that. The actual Wikipedia part for games, I think, is mostly handled by Wikipedia, so it's redundant. Not that having redundant sources of information is going to be particularly terrible, but it doesn't feel like there's much to that site, and Atari owning it will just be another property that more than likely gets handed over to another company. Like I could easily see Atari going out of business, the new Atari going out of business in the next 5 years, and then something like Embracer Group or even Microsoft buying all the name to Atari and all the licenses of Atari and getting Moby Games in the process, and then spending very little effort to improve it or change anything. Giant Bomb was supposed to be that database, and I think Giant Bomb probably has a much more active community as far as game databases are concerned, and I still even think at that Giant Bomb is probably not that relevant. Ideally, we'd like to see all of these databases find a consistent programmable interface where the information can be shared from site to site, and instead of potentially having the same person having to create an account on dozens of sites and upload the same information. Moving on, a new PlayStation Indie sale discounts over 1,500 products. The sale is currently only available in Europe and Australia, though, so it's not particularly helpful to people outside of those countries. Microsoft was Metacritic's highest rated publisher in 2021 with the largest average score ever. They beat out Sony, which placed second, which is interesting, and I think highlights how either Nintendo games are not reviewed that much, or Nintendo just allows a lot of garbage games, which there, in fairness, is a lot of garbage games that are third-party games for the Nintendo. Last year Microsoft was 6th, now they're 1st. Last year Sony was 4th, now it's 2nd. Whereas Humble Games was 3rd, and it was 18th before. Activision was Blizzard, now it's Activision Blizzard was 5th, now it's 4th. Bethesda was 16th. Capcom last year was 3rd and fell down fairly badly. And I imagine that really, for publishers like Capcom, that really was just like 2 successful games that came out last year. Bandai was 38th, Sega was 1st last year. I don't know why Sega would have been 1st last year. Maybe they only put out like Sonic Mania and that was it. EA was 21st, now it's 9th. 505 Games was 13th. Nintendo also failed to make the top 10 ranking 14th place, although it released 18 games. None of them were rated great, though Super Mario 3D World and Bowser's Fury and Metroid come close with an 89 and 88 respectively. And how Metacritic is making its list seems a little complicated, where it's considering only the ones that were rated great that I imagine were 90 or above. Yep. Moving on. 4 unannounced Valve titles have been found in Aperture Desk Job's data mine. It's unclear if any of these games are planned for a full release. This is, again, just Tyler McVickerson, formerly known as Valve News Network, being really the person who creates all the news around Valve stuff. I imagine it's very possible that there are aspects in the code that mention things that are being worked on in secret, but they're very early alpha, pre-alpha states, or just mentioning things as a way of an inside joke. The Citadel is a game that apparently is mentioned. And we'll just, like, none of it really matters, particularly any news or rumors of anything new coming from Valve just doesn't matter. Valve has created this odd position where they have destroyed the hype machine for themselves, where if they put out a new game, sure, check it out, play it, but don't expect anything from them. Really, they are flippant, to say the least, and you should really just be a fair weather follower of Valve as a publisher and game developer. Moving on, Final Fantasy gets the 35th anniversary site, teases game announcements to come soon. One of the Final Fantasy games there was the older pixel ones that were being remade, has a censored scene, and it's little 8-bit characters, and when they introduce one of the female characters, she's being punched / tortured in a prison cell, and that's in the original version, and then they like take it out in all future versions, and it really is just an 8-bit pixel doing a little punch animation, not even really making contact, and it making a little sound effect, which is kind of ridiculously extreme. Like, you might as well just go back to that level of violence, because it's historically accurate, and it was what the original creator wanted. Of course, they will probably argue that the original creator was the one that made the change and wanted the change, and that's why emulation of old games and having ROMs of the old versions of games are so important, because there are a lot of creators, like the creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion, for instance, that will just keep on editing and changing and making new versions and releasing the new versions. George Lucas changing things, editing things, adding CGI to the original Star Wars. And yeah, we need to historically preserve at least the original versions. And no censorship, even when there's self-censorship, when it happens, and know it as censorship and not just the artist's decision, because yes, it may be the artist's decision to self-censor, but it was not society's decision that agreed to you changing what they had nostalgia for and then selling a game on nostalgic basis. Like, if you told me you were going to give me a remake of Star Wars, and then you gave me the Star Wars special editions with all the edits and CGI and changes, you've lied to me, at the very least. So it may very well just be a case of lying and false advertising as much as censorship, if you're not concerned about censorship. Moving on, Horizon Forbidden West's new patch adds over 50 bug fixes and improvements. We are still on Video Games Chronicles. We're still on Video Games Chronicles articles here, and this guy is probably wrecking me. I don't think any new cards have been released, so this new strategy that's getting played seems to be just new people playing differently. Moving on, Hidetaka Miyazaki says Elden Ring's release was, quote, not a very pleasant time. Miyazaki praised his incredible team for being able to rise to the challenge of developing the game, basically saying there was a lot of crunch, which, yeah, there probably was. Also, it's a sad statement that there would be a lot of crunch on the game, and it still come out in a pretty bad shape. It, to me, makes me feel like this is probably a case of them not being given enough time, and potentially just not being capable of making the game well. They probably didn't have enough people. They probably didn't have enough time. And even if all of that isn't true, they just messed up. So it's kind of hard to be nice to people or empathetic to people, game developers that say, oh, we had to crunch, oh, we had to work so hard, and then they put out a game that is pretty bad. If it was Cyberpunk 2077 and they said, oh, we had to crunch and we had to work so hard, I don't think that would affect the people who had bought the game and were having a horrible experience. Moving on, Gotham Knights has been given a late 2022 release date. So it's coming out October 25th. At least it is for now. And I don't think there's any new indication as to if Batman really is going to appear, but I would heavily suspect Batman will show up in a flashback or something. Although if they, even up to launch date, are not saying Batman shows up, then I kind of have to believe Batman doesn't show up. Like, my only other thought would be that they would put out a teaser trailer and show off Batman. Nintendo has delayed the Advance Wars 1+2 reboot camp due to the events in Ukraine. I think we will probably see more people using Ukraine as an excuse. Although I can almost believe Nintendo. The game's war theme could be considered insensitive as Russia invasion and continues. But I mean, it really is a BS reasoning, certainly, that you're gonna delay every single war game. Every single game developer is gonna delay every single war game. Russia and Ukraine could be at war for technically decades. Yeah. So the world shouldn't stop just because a war is going on. Even though much of the world is slowing down and stopping because of that exact reason. Nintendo, there seems to be no other connection. On the other hand, now would be the time for them to put out Bayonetta 3 if they've got now a empty slot in their release window, because Bayonetta 3, I believe, is done completely. And yeah, I would be much happier if they did put out Bayonetta 3. I imagine the game is just not finished, and this is just kind of like a good excuse. What they didn't seem to commit to there is specifically never releasing the game. So they just delayed it, which really you'd have to take the next step and say we're never releasing this game if you're going to take that step, and they can't commit to that. Moving on, Strangers of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin demo leaks ahead of a state of play. There's some odd black squares here that, and kind of a fogginess over that image. Of course, you don't really need to see a demo leak if, like, the demo will come out legitimately soon enough. You don't even really need to play demos at all. Okay. Square Enix, in kind of a weird thing for a Japanese company, has launched its own YouTube music channel and added 5,500 tracks to YouTube Music. A wealth of officially licensed music is now available to listen to. I think through YouTube Music you would have to either have that YouTube Plus subscription or watch ads. Maybe you have to have the YouTube Plus subscription. Almost certainly, this also prevents other people from uploading and monetizing the music themselves, and almost certainly that is the real reason they would have gone that way. Which is, even that is odd for a Japanese company. Most Japanese companies have just been more than happy to try and DMCA everything out of existence. Man, some of these cards, some of these combos get that one-turn kill. And I've lost enough here to know that I can't be demoted lower, but I'm not winning enough to get any higher, so there's a decent chance we will be stuck at rank 5 gold until the next season ends. Here's an article, how to watch Sony's State of Play live stream on Wednesday, if you need that, from Video Games Chronicle. In March's Xbox update brings pin to quick resume, controller updates, and more. Audio hardware settings also receive an overhaul. So you can like pin games that you're interested in. Or pin games specifically on the quick resume screen, or pin specific games you want to allow quick resume to be a thing on. Which I guess the Xbox can quick resume multiple games at the same time. I'd assume that's the case. Bungie is hiring a creative director for a new third-person action game. So we can expect a new third-person action game. Lego Princess Peach's castle set has been revealed ahead of schedule. I don't know if it really is going to be this micro scale, or if this is just a picture of the Princess Peach's castle from the giant question mark block. You can see a Yoshi here, so they're referencing the Yoshi at the end of, I think, the original version of the game. There's a Luigi in the remake, but no Luigi in the original version of it. This is not the kind of set I'd want to get, but if they did make a very nice looking Lego Princess Peach's castle, then I might consider that instead of getting the smaller Disney castle that's, I think, Cinderella's castle is what it's based off of from the park. There's a $300 big Cinderella's castle that I wanted, but it's kind of rare, and I could scale down certainly and save some money and get the smaller version. And I kind of like the idea of them potentially making smaller versions of a castle like that. And it's not like a castle is going to yep, that's not going to work. Which means this isn't going to work either. Which means I've lost. Yeah, if I was to get Princess Peach's castle, it would definitely be a shelf item that wouldn't connect to or look that nice with other Lego sets other than the Nintendo 64. I mean, the NES Lego set that I already have. I've been very cautious about which Nintendo Lego sets I get, because a lot of them are just not particularly good, and they're for very little kids and they're cheap. But the ones I have gotten, or the one I've gotten, I think, really, I believe I've only gotten one, is nice. That's the NES with the old TV. Moving on, PlayStation confirms that it has suspended sales in Russia. SIE joins the global community in calling for peace in Ukraine. Again, I have to point out all of these brownie points people are seeking, woke points, a certain point, are simply because the financial transactions are not being allowed. Okay. How many of these did we get done? I could do the solo mode, certainly. On my cell phone with Yu-Gi-Oh! So if my computer really did just go down and I am not streaming for a while, that would probably be the reason. And I could still do the daily quest and stay up with the Yu-Gi-Ohs and come back and have a whole bunch of rewards to claim, or rewards that I would have claimed. Next time we have to duel 500 ranks for one pack. That is a pathetic reward. One legendary pack ticket. And then 1,000 for 100 gems. Still slowly making progress through these secret ones. But I really would have to make a deck to gain 30,000 life points. There's no way you're gonna do that, and I'd have to make a deck around equip cards. And if I have nothing better to do, I might do that, but I don't see how I specifically would have nothing better to do either. Let's just stay playing ranked so we can try and cover the news, although I really should just stop playing altogether. There's so much news here, and there's no good reason for there to be so much news. Capcom has announced a new dinosaur game called Exoprimal, which, you know what, that might be really cool as an idea. And maybe this is a potential future game that is a better version of the giant bugs attacking the world, whatever that game series is called. That every single one of those has been poorly made. And I definitely am up for a dinosaur game every now and then. Returnal is adding a campaign co-op and a new survival mode this month. We're calling it Returnal Ascension. I thought when I first saw this was an announcement of a sequel, which would be very weird for there to be a sequel to this game. It probably isn't going to sway too many people, though, to play Returnal or go back to Returnal, would be my guess. Like, people that liked Returnal, I think, probably had their share of it, and are probably more than happy to not play anymore. There might be an argument that when a game like Returnal fairly quickly has like a speedrun community around it, that may be in part an indication that the game, as far as casual players, is already done for and dead. Because in my mind there is definitely a shift that would happen between casual players just playing the game, talking about the story, showing it off, and then it being such a more niche experience that all attention turns to speedrunning the game. Like, ideally, and maybe this is just my own personal selfish desire. Games would be at least 3 or 4 years old before people start trying to speedrun them at all. Now, of course, there's no way to enforce that, but I'd like people to experience and enjoy the games as they're meant to be enjoyed before the only people getting any YouTube views as far as playing the games or Twitch views is people breaking the games through speedruns. Moving on, Square Enix has announced an action RPG Valkyrie Elysium for release in 2022. It'll be for the PS4 and PS5, PlayStation exclusive. Interesting. Square Enix has revealed a new tactical RPG called the Dio Field. Game will be for the PS4 and PS5 also. So they certainly seem to have gotten several announcements for PlayStation exclusives. I wouldn't be surprised if these were things announced during a PlayStation State of Play. And that is why let's see, go ahead and special summon this from the hand and then just discard this. Yeah, that might be why it's saying PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 at the moment. And I wouldn't be surprised if both of those games actually do have Xbox versions that will come out and be announced later. It doesn't really matter if they announce themselves only for the PS4 and PS5 on day one, because they probably don't even have the pre-orders up at this point. Moving on, Frey takes on a dragon in the latest Forspoken gameplay trailer. That being said, Forspoken was just delayed. And that is the last Video Games Chronicles. Gematsu has an article, Sold Out Games and Marketing rebrands as Fireshine Games, and I think we had already covered that. This is a collection of games I don't recognize, and I didn't recognize that company. So them rebranding might be a smart move. Here we've got another normal card, but you're getting only one. 2 more wins, it says now, to go up a rank. But if I lose, will it be 3 more wins? Endured Lilies, Quietest of Nights, I think we talked about that, sells 600,000 copies, and then the physical editions pre-orders open March 8th. Glover is coming to Steam, we talked about that. Forspoken being delayed to October 11th, we talked about that, yep. Obviously my program is causing some redundancies as far as where I'm anchoring and opening tabs, which totally explains why we would have so many tabs open. And honestly, if I had more time, I probably wouldn't hate covering the news a second time. Mainstream 24-hour news channels do that all the time, where they repeat the same story the next day, and maybe the next day, and maybe the next day, and maybe even the next week. So if I was trying to make 24 hours of content, or just a lot more content, repeating myself in case you missed it before is not a terrible thought. Alright. Play this. Cancel that. For half of his life. Unless he's got another Solomon's Judgment here. That may work out very well for me. Unless he has some way to cancel this. Let's see. A PC game called Witchspring Horror has its 3rd trailer. I don't recognize this game at all. And I really don't have time to watch this trailer either. but I'll do it anyways. Special summon this, discard this. So you got a little chibi witch anime girl. She's stirring a pot with her magical staff, and she's talking to and fighting other characters. Seems like it might be a positional placement RPG. I actually need to pay attention and play and not just watch the trailer. Also, yeah, the way I live stream would work so much better if I had somebody else also streaming with me. Of course, I could make it a lot better by doing a lot of things and spending a lot more time and manpower on it. So yeah, this Witchspring R seems like it's kind of an open world RPG game with little cutesy, chibi, kid-friendly characters, moe characters. Doesn't look terrible, doesn't look particularly great. Yeah, I would say it's much more in the moe style than just the chibi style. Although, it's kind of short even for moe. An adventure crafting game called Oconee Island and the Earthlock Adventure has been announced for everything. Let's go ahead and activate this trap. Let's see, it's taking a sweet time. It looks colorful, maybe a little too zoomed out for its own good. Like, these characters feel like they could be a little bit more zoomed in, but maybe there will be more enemies or more reason for the game to have such a big open empty fields. Again, I just really don't have time to watch blurred out trailers. It does kind of feel like it is more of a platformer and an adventure game, though, than a violence hack and slash game. Curious Expedition for the PS4 and Xbox One launches March 17th alongside DLC Highlands of Avalon for console. This is not a game I remember, although I do feel like I've seen this on Steam. Curious Expedition 2 is on Steam. It's rated very popular. It is on my wish list. So, it's a little RPG game with, I think, more story going on. Definitely has like around the world in 80 days vibe. Disguise 6 launches June 28th in the West. State of play set for March 9th, featuring 20 minutes of PS4 and PS5 games. I bet that has already happened. And that was some of the announcements. Come on, let's play. I want to play this that way it activates before his actions activate, in case he does something wonky. He may have messed up my strategy here. See if this wins or not. I don't think he can activate his ability before I can activate mine. I don't think he knows how this works. Maybe he does. We'll do it again and see if that works. Well, I am doomed. Do this. Do this. Actually, I should summon that normally, shouldn't I? Yeah, if there was some way... Oh, no, I should have attacked that. Oops. I played stupidly. If I had attacked this with this, then it would have been 18 to 15. I might have been able to win there. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands Chaos Chamber trailer is available, according to Gamatsu. We don't need to look at the Tiny Tina Wonderlands chamber. Game Informer's issue 344 cover story is on Forspoken, which very rarely do they even talk about Game Informer. Star Trek Resurgence's Spock's briefing gameplay is now viewable, which I vaguely think they may have mentioned Star Trek Resurgence as a game, but I have not heard anything about it lately. Nor do I think I'd be particularly hyped around any Star Trek games at the moment. They'd have to be based on the next generation and done very well. We already talked about F-Zero X coming to Nintendo Switch Online. Serenity Forge is going to distribute Chorus worldwide titles at retail in North America and Europe. I have no idea who Chorus Worldwide is though. So the publisher of Coffee Talk and Uoni. Yeah, which I recognize Coffee Talk, I don't recognize Uoni. EVO's 2022 lineup has been announced, so it's going to be Street Fighter V Championship Edition, Guilty Gear something, Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate, King of Fighters 15, Tekken 7, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Skullgirls something, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, and Melty Blood. I definitely feel like Melty Blood and Grand Blue Fantasy may be new, even maybe Guilty Gear, and Dragon Ball FighterZ is a big one that's probably new. I guess the real question is which one of these is replacing Smash Brothers. Grand Blue Fantasy is its first appearance, and Guilty Gear Strive is its first appearance. And King of Fighters 15 is its first appearance, and Melty Blood Type Lumnia is its first appearance. So, and Skullgirl's second encore. Alright, so I guess you'd have to probably do some more digging to see if there's been a previous Grand Blue Fantasy or Guilty Gear, because there's about like 5 new fighting games. Maybe too many new fighting games for their own good. But I don't follow EVO that much, so I kind of just don't care. We should probably start looking at some of the games that came out. And I think we'll just go with a yes/no on these. We may not even scroll down. That's going to be a no. Yeah, we have a non-binary visual novel, which really feels like there's very little visual in it. So that's going to be no. I assume that's what it's about. Is the world is binary, why love is the answer. I wonder if maybe this isn't a non-binary LGBTQ plus story, or if it is actually a pro-binary statement, in the idea of there are males and females, and I refuse to accept that there could possibly be anybody who feels differently to that opinion, or feels like there's something in between, or something other than their birth gender. That would be kind of controversial to have that come out. Here we have Ghostwire Tokyo Prelude, which is mixed as a free-to-play. I think it really is just a visual novel to Ghostwire Tokyo. And if I had more time, I would check to see why people are reviewing it so poorly. Are they reviewing it poorly because it's a bad visual novel, or are they reviewing it poorly because it's just not a very good story? Here we have a review, pretty meh, but it's nice to get a better idea of the state of the world before the events of the game. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this is also a fairly short visual novel too, less than 2 hours. We have a tower defense game, for lack of a better term. And so that's going to be no. Here we have a Nice Day, which is rated very... or Have a Nice Death, which was rated very positively. It's in early access though, so I'm going to leave it on the fall list and not put it on the wish list. Otherwise, I would have put it on the wish list. And it's kind of funny, this game came out yesterday and seems like nobody's talking about it. It probably is a big enough game for people to be talking about it. It's published by Gearbox Publishing, for what little they've published. And clearly Gearbox Publishing has never been good about actually being a publisher and spending money on advertising games. This Robot Space Stories and Battles is obviously a no. Jigsaw Pink is just jigsaw puzzles with girls, so that's obviously a no. Ancient Medieval Empire. Let's see. English and Russian. Doesn't look like much of a game. It's a tower defense game. Anyways, no. Second World. Doesn't look visually polished enough for a platformer, so no to that. North End Tower Defense actually does look visually polished enough to potentially does look like it actually deserves a follow on this, although I'd probably never actually play a tower defense game. I kind of like the idea of, hey, if you're making a tower defense game, you're effectively making a warfront, trench warfare style game, so why not just embrace that and do it in a kind of cutesy way. Urban Mage here, on the other hand, just don't think there's enough of a polish for this to be a game I'd want to play, so no to that. My personal Heliopet is a Tamagotchi clone game, but it visually looks awful, so I don't see any reason why I would want to do that. If you're just going to make a Tamagotchi clone, just make a Tamagotchi clone. Don't make it ugly on top of that. New Lands Collector's Edition looks like it is one of these resource management city games. And so I'm gonna say nope for that one. Chrysopanthea looks like it's a RPG Maker style game, although maybe not actually using RPG Maker. It's also tagged as an MMORPG, which I heavily question how many people would be online. Arena Drift Master. Looks like it's kind of a one-screen car drifting game. That's not complicated or visually polished enough for drifting. It's zoomed out too much for a drifting game also. Orcon Inscriptions Mongolia is some kind of art museum in VR. I've never heard of this, just like towers with inscriptions on them on display out in the open. From AD 700 to 735. Unfortunately, this looks awful though. I think we have to say no to it. But that is interesting. Maybe I should find some free time and look that up. Here we have a shoot 'em up game with an anime girl. Nothing special there. So we'll say no to that. Here we have Goth Dating Sim 2022, which you can see is already mixed and the animation is not particularly good. And frankly, I wouldn't even really call this girl goth. I really wouldn't classify somebody goth if they have green hair and not that much dark eyeshadow. Just wearing black clothes does not make you goth as a character. Black fingernail polish I don't think makes you stand out in my mind as goth either. Here we have something called Four Winds Fantasy, which looks terrible. So that's a no. Alright, so we just lost. We probably have lost several times. And it does say 3 more wins to get to Gold Tier 4. So I'd have to really have a strategy that could win 2 or 3 times in a row. Or just get lucky disconnects and then stop playing ranked, which you can't stop playing ranked because of the daily quests. So you're forever forced to play ranked, which is probably a good thing for a collectible card game. Here we have a hidden post-apocalyptic top-down 3D. I assume that this would have been a hidden object game with having hidden in the name, but yeah, that's what it is. It's a hidden object game. They're calling it a tactical RPG, but I don't believe that to be true at all. It is an interesting thought, certainly, to have a post-apocalyptic world that is much more overgrown and has much taller grass. Because that is not something that you particularly see in most post-apocalyptic stories. Somebody recently has mowed the grass everywhere, and you can see the zombies coming from a mile away. Whereas a real-world zombie scenario, if such a thing could happen, which is unlikely it could, would probably have zombies crawling on the ground and injuring themselves, breaking their legs, or tearing their limbs off, and then them still being a very dangerous thing because they could crawl to through the grass and be right next to you and make very little noise. They could be like snakes, effectively. Here you have a very traditional depiction of zombies running fast and just running directly at you. In this game, Z-Plague, which visually is not polished enough to make it to the fall list. Here we have Get Off My Space, which also fails for visuals. I may start using that term. I just thought of it. Zombie Crush Driver. I kind of like this concept, and I would like to see some game touch upon this, where you're racing and running over zombies. Arguably these are sequences, though, that should be shown, not the entire gameplay mechanic. And even watching the demo, I think it would be fairly annoying to just be driving non-stop and running over zombies. activate this. Can't activate any traps or spells. But then it doesn't stop them from chaining and activating a chain or a trap or spells. Let's see. Here we have Dodo Bodo, which looks like nothing. Here we have Underground Dungeon, which looks like nothing. Here we have Snow Dreams Lost in Winter, which actually looks like a visual novel, but I don't think it supports English. $16.19, Chinese only. I will applaud this as being a better looking Chinese visual novel. They are slightly getting better, I think. Ironsmith Medieval Simulator is mostly negative already, so we can say no to that. Let's come over here and play. He did activate the trap, by the way. Since we don't have any follow list games, we can separate out the new games that came out on Steam a little bit differently. Let's see. He killed my guy. So I'd have to get fairly lucky to win here. Gamatsu has the PlayStation's Japan Run lineup video. Introduces 20 PlayStation 4 and 5 titles as Aoi Utano runs in the back to the background music of Nati Lee In with vocals by Mari Usagi, which almost certainly would get me content ID'd if I was to play it with the music on. So suffice it to say, Sony is pushing hard, particularly for the to maintain control and gain back some followers of the Japanese audience. Horizon Forbidden West being shown, SD Gundam being shown, a Final Fantasy Chibi characters being shown, Babylon's Fall being shown, Strangers in Paradise being shown. I'm just skipping through this. Ghostwire Tokyo being shown. The baseball game. Yep. I don't think there's any new announcements though in these games, and almost certainly it's a case that by the time they make a commercial that's specifically for TV and just trying to get people to buy the PlayStation in general, those games and those game announcements will have been already out there as individual trailers. Gametsu has the Famitsu review scores. Elden Ring getting 39 out of 40. One shy of a perfect score. Which again, Elden Ring I don't feel like is perfect as a game. I think it could be way better in a year or two with some updates and user interface improvements. Horizon Forbidden West, 37 out of 40, which is still pretty high. King of Fighters getting a very generic 32 out of 40. Yeah, and I haven't had a problem at all. You know what? There has been consistently this issue with little hitches happening on my computer while I was recording. And if I hear those again, that is going to be the notification that I'm just going to have to build a whole new computer. at that point. But I mean, well, you don't really know. It could still just be the RAM. G-Skill gave me new RAM, but that doesn't inherently mean it won't fail also. Although it might fail 2 years from now. But yeah, I was getting these little hitches and stutters that were very weird when I was recording for the past couple of weeks, and I have been turning a complete blind eye to it and just assuming it was an NVIDIA driver issue. And now, in retrospect, it seems fairly obvious that that was the indications of the RAM failing. I'm hoping it was the RAM failing. Let's see. Guess we'll just special summon this and see how this goes. I want to wrap up now as fast as possible because literally my chair is getting uncomfortable. And once again, I won't be doing any recording tomorrow, so because I have something else non-YouTube related I have to do, which means on Friday I probably won't have made any new footage. And I need to make a wrap-up video to explain what happened with LEGO Worlds because it just crashed as I was talking. Moving on, Gamatsu says Media Vision has 5 new titles in development. The studio launches a Twitter account as this heads to its 30th anniversary. It's kind of late to be launching a Twitter account. Media Vision makes the Wild Arms series. I don't think it's Wild Arms, but there's a Nintendo Switch game called Arms that was a boxing game. And that was one of the games that I would have liked to see received a lot better so that there would actually be a chance of a sequel and that it would be something along the lines of being similar to Punch-Out, but it is an odd situation where it seems only Nintendo games actually sell on the Nintendo Switch, and that's it. Let's see if this protects this guy. Probably doesn't. See how this plays out. Nope, it totally didn't. Let's see, Chrono Trigger for PC and smartphone update to add a full screen support, auto battle speed boost, and more on March 11th. Which, the fact that it doesn't have full screen support is pretty bad. And an auto battle or speed boost might be something that would really help me potentially play something like Chrono Trigger as an older series. It's a relevant series. So if you can get through the grindy part, even by just automating it, that would be great. But I would probably want 2 or 3 times the speed boost, if not 4 times, depending on how grindy the game is. A 2-player co-op roguelite action game called Ship of Fools has been announced for consoles and PCs. Which, okay. There might be something to this, but it also kind of feels like it might be all over the place. Several of these screenshots don't feel connected, and kind of feels like all your fights might take place on a ship, which that might be a little weird. Or mostly on the ship. Let's see. We already talked about Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp being delayed to an unannounced date. We already talked about Gotham Knights launching October 25th. A musical adventure game called Snufkin, Melody of Moomy Valley, has been announced for consoles and PC. Let's see. You have this screenshot, the back of a character, and that's about it. Now you have some other screenshots. It looks kind of roughly animated on purpose, but there might be a game here. Yeah. Come on. Let me actually get that to the field and destroy all his cards. Yeah, one of the games I considered and then kind of dismissed was Yoshi's Woolly World, because, yeah, I'm not that big of a fan of Yoshi's Woolly World, but I think it would justify itself being played. And I also don't think it was on sale. The problem here with getting a Nintendo Switch is that to really get the best advantage out of it, I would need to go back to GameStop on a fairly recent. I need to go to inside a GameStop on a fairly regular amount of time, a fairly regular basis, to try and find really good deals on used games, or find a different source of games, whether that's going to a local library and renting out a video game, which you can do at most local libraries these days. That might work too, but I doubt I'd spend the effort to do it. Like, it is a very weird experience to go back to consoles, even a little bit, and not have that convenience of a Steam sale and just buying the game and just being able to download the game. Yeah. Moving on, Gensho Shoujo Wars Dream of the Stray Dreamer for Switch launches March 31st in Japan. This is the first I've heard of this game, and it's very possible it won't come to the West. Looks like it's got a lot of text, and it looks like it's probably a Toho game. Toho style game. Evil Dead, the game, has the Kandarian Demon gameplay trailer, which I believe that would have been one of the demons from the past in Evil Dead 2. So check out that trailer if you want to. I'm trying to save time here. I kind of want the Evil Dead game to succeed, but I question if it will. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands has detailed a season pass. And here you have a demon girl with actually kind of small boobs for a demon. Kind of an emphasis on this leather outfit, but compared to the purple, but not even that much. So there will be 4 exciting post-launch content drops, they say. Endless possibilities in customization. Diamond Pony Glider coming to Fortnite. There's a Fortnite crossover. So yeah, you can watch the trailer to see more. It's 2 minutes long. There's really no way, though, to look at the Tiny Teeny Wonderlands game and not just see it as them trying to sell Borderlands a second time and telling a different story. But that's not really a bad thing either, that they're making what was a very popular DLC thing a standalone experience. But I seriously doubt Gearbox could succeed making Borderlands and then Tiny Tina spin-off games over and over again. Like, there's not that many people that I think would buy 2 Borderlands games in a 4-year cycle. And there's always going to be a question as far as, are there going to be that many people interested in a fantasy world that still is shooting guns? Mostly. I just watched the trailer and there's not much to say really about it. New Game Plus Expo 2022 is set for March 31st according to Gamatsu. Forspoken has a spells and combat gameplay. There, I lost again. I think we can go ahead and just stop at this point. The odds are pretty much 0 that I'd get 3 wins in a row in ranked. And we have no daily quests around that. If I was going to do anything, I should just play solo player mode. We're approaching 8,000 in gems, but I really question how many gems I'll be able to get after I've done all the unlimited streams, all the unlimited quests. Let's see, we already talked about the dinosaur themed game Exoprimal being announced. Ghostwire Tokyo has a pre-launch trailer if you want to check that out. Strangers in Paradise Final Fantasy Origins Store demo launches today for consoles, so no point in trying to find the leak at this point. Forspoken's Worlds Collide trailer and new key art is out. Gundam Evolution has been confirmed for the PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Steam network test applications are now available. Gundam Evolution is not an SD Gundam game. It's just the regular Gundam characters. I'm not sure any of these Gundam games are ever going to be any good though. I just don't know if they put enough budget into them, or maybe the whole concept might be flawed. A game called Giga Bash has a Rawa trailer, which is showing off a kaiju. I think that's what this is a kaiju game. Apparently coming to PC. Yeah, Giga Bash is one of these fighting kaiju games. Konami has announced that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles The Cowabunga Collection is coming out for everything. They've also announced that it exists, which would be Ninja Turtles the arcade version, Turtles in Time the arcade version, the NES version, Ninja Turtles 2, 3 for NES, Tournament Fighters for NES, 4 for the Super Nintendo, Tournament Fighters for the Super Nintendo, Hyperstone Heist for Sega Genesis, Tournament Fighters for Sega Genesis, Fall of the Foot Clan for Game Boy, Turtles 2 Back from the Sewers for Game Boy, Turtles 3 for Radical Rescue for the Game Boy. Several of those games are obviously just different ports of the same game, but effectively you're buying a collection of ROMs, which you could probably have just gotten the ROMs at some other time. This is probably in part because Nickelodeon, I believe, bought the rights to Ninja Turtles from the original owner, and so Nickelodeon is just getting around to licensing it and making ports and re-releasing them. But arguably, I have made the opinion known that if a game is not available for purchase legitimately for 5 years, it should probably be considered public domain at that point. So that entire collection would be games, in my mind, that should be considered public domain. And you should just be able to get the ROMs and emulate them the normal way. And if you are emulating games, you probably don't want a specific game just around Ninja Turtles. You probably want an emulator that can launch multiple types of games. Anyways, moving on, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R has been announced for everything. Which, yeah, Netflix has this series of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure most recently, which I suspect that means that all of these have already been animated and these two haven't been animated yet. And people are really into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I just don't know why, but making a fighting game around a fighting manga certainly makes sense. I think, though, you would definitely want to play something like Dragon Ball FighterZ first before you got into a more niche fighting game around something like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure also kind of has stood the test of time, so it's a good game to potentially consider. The game Trek to Yomi has a story trailer and a Japanese voice cast announced. Returnal's version 3.0 update Ascension launches March 2020. Adds online co-op and Tower of Sisyphus modes. We already talked about that. Square Enix announcing real-time strategy RPG The Diofield Chronicles for everything. We had already talked about that. And then Square Enix announcing the action RPG Valkyrie Elysium for PS4, PS5, and PC. Which I guess now we're being told also PC, where Video Games Chronicle didn't mention PC. Here we have a game on Steam called Deflection, which we can say no to. So I try to burn through everything. Here's a third of this sinking structure, Slion and the Lost Child games being released basically a week and a half apart from the second game and the first game. And it all looks very low effort and very ugly. Just flooding Steam with weird, ugly game. Here we have a game called End It Please, which looks like it is a frustration, difficult platforming game that they're also tagging as a psychological horror game. Next we have a game called Pixel Art, which looks like it's just a pixel art paint game, and it's probably not that good. Very wide variety of art styles here, which makes me assume there's a chance that these pictures were either licensed or just stolen from the internet. Yep, so that is definitely no. It's also really expensive at $12.99. Here we have Bethany's Teleshop, which looks like it's probably just a match 3 puzzle game. Don't think there's enough visual polish here, though, for what you're actually doing to want to play this. Seems a little too simplistic, doesn't look visually. This here, they're saying only 1% of players can solve this puzzle, which that is very clickbaity. Here we have something called Vacation Paradise California Collector's Edition, which is a hidden object game, so no to that. Then we have Drill Deal Oil Tycoon, which is apparently a business simulator game, and I don't think I would want that. I also don't like the blocky art style for a business simulator game. That's a mismatch. Here we have Traffic Dispatcher, which, yeah, I don't think there's enough of a game here to interest me on that either. Now, what's inherently going to happen is there might have been some announcements that happened as we were streaming, although we did start fairly late. This Tales of Norvalley is nothing. And so then on Friday there might be a bunch of announcements, if I even am able to stream on Friday. I hope I am. It seems like I will be able to. Seems like everything is working fine, if maybe a little slow. This Ignited Steel Mech Tactics is not my style of game, so I'm going to say no to it as a positional placement strategy game. So I really should go through my Twitter feed or specifically run the macro again, but the macro would be a nightmare and I just want to wrap up, so I think I'm going to just risk it in the hope that there isn't that much news on Friday, and then I am able to stream on Friday. If I'm not able to stream on Friday, I'll have to start curating games that came out on Steam and just keep the ones that are really important. This Jessica Mysterious Journey almost looks like a point-and-click game I'd want to play, but not quite, and it's not widescreen, so I'm going to say no to it. Let's see, we can also see how much it is. $4.19 is not incredibly expensive. This I'll say no to just because it's very poorly animated with black and white checker things. You can barely see anything there at all. But yeah, once I put the lid back on my computer, I imagine the fan noise would not be that bad. One thing I have learned here, this Will You Snail, I'm going to say no to, obviously. Wow, $12.74. Again, way too expensive for a lot of these games. Is make sure you can get all of your fans to spin at full speed. You probably always want them to spin at full speed anyways, but when building a computer, have the case off, make sure all the fans are spinning at full speed all the way to Windows. They may spin at full speed when you first turn on the computer and then slow down, and it's not really what I would want. I think I'm going to say no to Coney the Secret of Castles. It's just a box pushing Sokomon game. And ironically, Chip's Challenge has so many interactive elements that it is way better than a lot of these box pushing Sokomon games that come out these days. It has too many elements, certainly, but there was a nice middle ground between all the elements in Chip's Challenge 1 and Chip's Challenge 2 compared to an average Sokomon game. You probably have a decent experience. But yeah, when building a computer, make sure all your fans spin at full speed. Buggy game, I'll say no to. And probably keep them at full speed. Click to 10 is obviously a incredibly low effort game. How did something like this get approved by Steam? Literally ridiculous game where you're just clicking and that's all you're doing. Cube Racer 2 looks bad, looks pixely, so I'll say no to that. Brain Bread 2 looks like there might actually be a zombie first-person shooter here. It's free. I bet it's co-op online PvP focused though. Yeah, doesn't look terrible, and it is mostly positive, so if Brain Bread 2 looks interesting to you, check it out as maybe a Left 4 Dead type clone. Here we have Submerged Hidden Depths, which I hope this is a good game and has more gameplay mechanics than the first Submerged game. So I'll put this on the fall list. I wouldn't be surprised though if very few people play it or even care about it. In a lot of ways, it's a game that barely had any relevancy. The first Submerged did, and the second game may have fallen out of relevancy. And then we have Isbot 2, which is just a frustration platformer, so I can say no to that. That leaves me with the game developer articles. There's a report that there are allegations of insider trading linked to the Microsoft Activision deal. Yeah, right, that'll get investigated. That won't actually stop the deal from going through, more than likely. And those allegations can be 100% false. We already talked about Nintendo delaying the Advanced War remaster. There's been a few remasters that have been really bad remasters, like the Life is Strange remasters anyway. So perhaps it would be better if people slowed down on making remasters if they're not going to do it right. We already talked about Atari buying Moby Games database for 1.5. They also bought the option to purchase Moby Games at that price in November of 2021. I think they bought the website, not just the database. But the way they're phrasing it, it's like they bought the database and not the website, which would be weird. The database is the valuable part there, but you'd think you'd throw in the website too. A former PlayStation exec, Roberto Barrera, is now the head of Netflix's video game strategy. Oh, speaking of Netflix games, there was the Cat Burglar interactive Netflix video. I played through it. It is pretty awful as a game. It's actually fairly hard to win and move the story forward because you have to answer 3 questions right. If you get one wrong, you lose one of your 3 lives. And you barely have enough time for slow TVs and smart TVs to interact with it. Plus, the cartoon itself is much more like Ren and Stimpy animation at points than kid-friendly, where it feels like it should have been a lot more kid-friendly and more Tom and Jerry, and it really isn't that. So I found that fairly off-putting too. So yeah, Netflix has not really done very well with any of its interactive movies. I will say that Cat Burglar did seamless transitions from one pre-made cutscene to another cutscene, so I didn't see it didn't fade out and then fade back in or anything. But that's about the only thing good I can say about it. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says Ratchet & Clank's alternate universe heroes almost looked very different, which, okay, who cares? Like, that's not really relevant. Apparently 8 women have joined a class action lawsuit against Sony PlayStation. 8 women have come forward with additional counts of alleged sexism and discrimination at Sony. Is this the old Sony, or is this the new Sony? Or both? Yeah. It's believable. It's totally believable, but I don't think Sony is quite to the point where it would get canceled, or that the Sony Interactive Entertainment of Japan would swoop in and shut down Sony Interactive Entertainment of California. So yeah, I don't think Sony is the next one on the chopping block, particularly with Microsoft buying a problem in part by acquiring Activision Blizzard. But give it a couple years, give it a few more stories, and that might be what happens. I would expect maybe Gearbox or EA to be the next on the chopping block for accusations, or Ubisoft, if they can ever get anything to stick at Ubisoft. if anything actually is happening at Ubisoft. Sony shuts down its Russian operations. We had already covered that. And then Ikamui Nakamura has debuted Unseen, a new borderless game studio. The video game artist and director and several former colleagues from Tango Gameworks and other companies are debuting a new studio. Yeah. So, okay. It's good to hear. Well, kind of need to wait to see if there's any new news around that. Oh, and the good news is I only have like 17 new tweets, so I could really just see if there's any new news fairly quickly, and that's helpful because I definitely was concerned that I was going to come to my Twitter feed run into a bunch of new news things. So yeah, let me just scroll down here, see if there's anything new. I can open G4 TV and mute them again. That's what I planned on doing. Alright, that's gonna work perfectly. Mute G4 TV. Good. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this stream. And the statistics don't lie. We are taking 1 millisecond or less to render a frame. I dropped 1 frame per due to rendering lag, and 1 frame was skipped due to encoding lag, which I imagine all of these ones may be the minimal number. Like, we've had no dropped frames because of network lag. I've had no weird hiccups while recording and streaming. I've been going for nearly 3 hours. When opening new tabs, the RAM does seem slower. That's the thing. But if I can get replacement RAM from G.Skill and just run it at a very slow speed, maybe I can buy some time before I have to spend $300 to replace the RAM completely. And that will buy me time to potentially make sure it's not a problem with the GPU, CPU, power supply, or motherboard. And maybe just having the fans and the BIOS reset all those settings was in part what needed to just happen. And maybe I had accidentally overclocked my computer in some way that I shouldn't have done. I would fully suggest not to overclock anything. Overbuy on the hardware, run it at stock speeds. Make your computers last, unless you're rich and are willing to buy a new computer every year or two. Well, I'm happy with this stream since nothing bad happened. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.